In the shadowed folds of the Appalachian foothills, where satellite signals fade and paved roads give way to gravel and pine needles, there is a place most maps no longer name, a place that doesn't show up in modern GPS systems, and even locals hesitate to mention. It is called Briar Hollow, and it is a place where time forgot to move forward. Perched in northern Pennsylvania and surrounded on all sides by dense, choking forest, Briar Hollow is little more than a scattering of moss-covered homes, a collapsed church, and the skeletons of old barns. It is the kind of place that carries silence like a curse, thick, heavy, and absolute, but it is not the silence that gives Briar Hollow its dread. It's the mist, a gray veil that clings to the ground even in the height of summer. It pours from the forest like a secret and never fully burns away. Not even at noon. It softens the edges of everything, turns trees into looming shadows and buildings into ghosts. Residents say it started decades ago, back when the hospital was still open. Others claim it was always there, waiting at the northern edge of town, behind a crumbling stone wall and an overgrown iron gate, stands the abandoned structure once known as Briar Hollow Sanatorium for Women. Built in 1907, it rises like a rotting tooth from the hillside, 3 stories of mold, beaten brick and shattered windows, half sunk into the earth as if trying to bury itself. There is no sign, no plaque, no official record of what it once was, just ivy, stone, and the creeping sense that something inside is watching. No one in town will go near it. Children are warned away. Teenagers who dare each other to approach the grounds are quickly discouraged by elders who speak in hushed tones and cross themselves when the subject is raised. The local sheriff's office has standing orders. No trespassing reports are to be responded to. Not because of danger, at least not in the normal sense, but because the last 2 deputies who investigated a reported break-in there were never the same again. They returned pale, silent. One resigned the next day and moved 3 states away. The other took his own life 3 months later, so the building remains, forgotten by law, reclaimed by weather, and yet never truly empty. Those who have stood at the gate, just close enough to peer through the bars, where they've seen lights flicker behind broken windows, heard faint footsteps on tile floors long since cracked. One visitor claimed she heard soft weeping carried on the wind, as if dozens of women, long dead, were crying through time itself. The state has no current record of Briar Hollow Sanatorium. No funding, no demolition date, no ownership. It simply exists, like a tumor on the landscape, unacknowledged, but growing in the mind of anyone who looks too long. But some remember. There are whispers in dusty town archives, journal entries buried in library basements, and one box, misfiled under agricultural permits, containing what appears to be a patient log, charred at the edges and smeared with something that looks disturbingly like dried blood. Most of the names have been redacted, all but one. Eleanor Grieve, age 23, admitted October 12, 1911. Diagnosis, moral instability, outcome unknown. That single handwritten note sparked the investigation you're about to hear. Because Eleanor Grieve was never officially discharged. No obituary, no death certificate, no body, and she is just one of 79 unaccounted for women who entered Briar Hollow Sanatorium and never came out. Tonight, we begin uncovering what happened inside those walls, who built this place, and why the town has worked so hard to bury it. This isn't a ghost story. This is a history lesson. And history, as we're about to learn, can be a living, breathing thing, especially when it's hungry to be remembered. In the early 1900s, America was swelling with progress. Industrial cities throbbed with promise, railroads stretched across wild land, and electricity was beginning to glow in homes once lit only by fire. It was a new era, one of invention, possibility, order, but not for everyone, not for women who broke too easily, or spoke too loudly, or wanted too much. By 1906, Cities like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh were overrun with what polite society referred to as troubled women, a vague and all-encompassing term used to label those who didn't conform, women who suffered from grief too long, women who didn't marry fast enough, women who had thoughts they shouldn't speak. Diagnoses such as hysteria, melancholia, and moral failing became catch-alls. And treatment, that was always someone else's decision. Out of this cultural fog emerged Dr. Charles Whale in Dorn, a man both praised and feared in medical circles. He was a physician by title, but something closer to a philosopher by temperament. A man fascinated not by illness, but by control. He believed that disorder, in the mind, in the home, in society, could be excised like a tumor if only one had the right instruments. He wrote, in his now lost journals, "The mind is clay, especially in women. With time and pressure, we can reshape it into any form we desire." In 1907, backed quietly by 3 East Coast benefactors and a shadowy religious society, Dr. Dorn purchased 48 acres of land near Briar Hollow. The deed was acquired through a Pennsylvania realty firm under a false name. No public announcement was made. No press release followed. And within a year, construction began. Locals were told it would be a rest home, a rural retreat for well-born women suffering from urban exhaustion. A sanctuary, they said, a place for recovery, and in truth, that's how it looked at first. Briar Hollow Sanatorium was an architectural anomaly for its time. Tall and severe, built in the Gothic Revival style, its arched windows and parapet roofline gave it the appearance of a small cathedral. But the beauty was only skin deep. Beneath the surface, the building was designed with unsettling precision. Hallways were unnaturally long. Patient rooms were sealed with inward-locking doors. Ventilation shafts were routed to muffle screams rather than circulate air. The basement, which spanned nearly a third of the building's footprint, was heavily reinforced with steel beams and stone thicker than most prison walls. There was no chapel, no garden, but there were restraints. There were observation corridors built with one-way mirrors, and there were cells, behind closed doors the staff handpicked by Dr. Dorn referred to the patients not as women but as subjects, each given a number, each categorized by behavior, pliability, and how closely they responded to Dorn's developing treatment. Treatments he referred to only as conditioning. By the spring of 1910, the sanatorium was at capacity. 42 women lived behind those walls. Most arrived in silence, delivered by wealthy families who paid to keep names off the public record. It was said that more than half the women committed had no medical diagnosis. They were simply inconvenient, unmarried, unruly, unwanted. To outsiders, the facility retained its disguise. Mail was sent, flowers delivered, donations accepted. Reports were filed quarterly by a secretary whose handwriting would later be revealed to be forged. Everything appeared normal, except no one ever saw a patient leave, not one. Instead, new patients arrived weekly, each carted up the wooded road in covered wagons, horse-drawn ambulances, or private carriages. Always at night, always under a veil of secrecy, the townspeople began to call the place the house where daughters disappear. But even those whispers would fade, because eventually the women didn't just stop leaving. They stopped writing, no letters, no telegrams, no calls, just nothing. Records from 1911 show that 13 families filed formal complaints to the State Health Board, demanding answers about their daughters, wives, or sisters. The responses were always the same. The patients were still in recovery, under observation, or unable to be visited due to mental fragility. But one mother refused to accept the silence. Her name was Hannah Grieve, a widow from Philadelphia whose only daughter, Eleanor, had been admitted just 6 months earlier. She received one letter after Eleanor's arrival. A brief, cold message written in mechanical handwriting that read, "I am receiving the help I need. Do not worry. I must rest now." It was signed in a way Eleanor never signed her letters, "With obedience, your daughter." That was the last anyone heard from her. Hannah sold her jewelry, pawned family heirlooms, and traveled to Briar Hollow herself. She arrived alone in the dead of winter, with snow falling so heavily the road was nearly impassable. She never made it to the building. Locals would later testify that she arrived at the general store asking for directions and was warned, strongly, to turn back. An older man, the last remaining veteran of the Civil War in Briar Hollow, is said to have placed a hand on her shoulder and whispered, "If you step through those gates, you won't come out the same, if you come out at all." Hannah Grieve ignored the warning. She vanished that same night. Her carriage was found 3 days later, turned over in a ditch, the horse dead from exposure, but there were no tracks, no blood, no sign of where Hannah had gone. Only the scarf she had worn, caught in the black iron bars of the sanatorium gate. What happened to her remains a mystery. The official report lists her as lost in inclement weather. But that doesn't explain why her name was later found scribbled in the margins of Dr. Dorn's private patient log, next to a single word, voluntary. Tonight, we are only beginning to understand what Briar Hollow Sanatorium truly was. Not a sanctuary, not a hospital, a harvesting ground, and those early years, they were only the beginning. For the outside world, it was just another year. The Titanic had sunk just months earlier, leaving a grieving world mesmerized by tragedy on the high seas. A presidential election was underway in the United States. America, it seemed, was looking forward, eyes set on progress, on power, on invention. But deep in the hills of Pennsylvania, in the forest-shadowed edge of Briar Hollow, something else was happening. Something terribly quiet. The kind of quiet that seeps under doors. The kind of quiet that doesn't come from absence, but from a choice, a deliberate sealing away of sound, of movement, of truth. The residents of Briar Hollow, few as they were, began to notice. It began subtly. The lights that glowed from the sanatorium's upper windows each night, the ones locals had called the watchlights, stopped appearing. The chimneys ceased smoking. The wagons that had once creaked along the wooded road vanished entirely. No more deliveries, no more letters, nothing in, nothing out. It was as if the building had sunk into the earth and dragged all its inhabitants with it. The mailman, who made the fortnightly trek to the outer gate, reported something strange in January. A bundle of letters addressed, sealed, and stamped had been left in the mailbox at the front of the property. No one saw who placed them there. No footsteps in the snow led up to it, and none of the names on the envelopes matched the patient roster submitted the year before. One was simply addressed to the one who is listening. Inside, a single sheet of paper stained with water damage and something else, something darker. The message read, "We are becoming what he wants. The ones who fight it are never seen again." There was no signature. No return address, just a handprint, small, feminine, pressed into the bottom corner like a stamp. The letter was never officially filed. The mailman, terrified, burned it in his stove and left town 2 days later. He told no one, except his brother, a coal miner in Pottsville, who passed the story down to his daughter. Decades later, she would publish it in a self-published memoir titled Hollow Warnings, but the truth would remain hidden. Because that year, 1912, would later be called the Vanishing year, every single patient and staff member disappeared. No bodies, no transfers, no reports, just absence. 42 women, 12 orderlies, 4 nurses, 1 surgeon and doctor, Charles Dorn himself, gone. But it wasn't just the people. It was as if the building itself tried to erase its own memory. When state officials finally visited the facility, after months of unanswered letters, they found the sanatorium entirely abandoned. Doors left ajar, beds made as if waiting for occupants who never returned. Dust covered every surface, but there were no signs of struggle, no broken glass, no dried blood, just stillness. Cold, immaculate stillness. The medical records were missing, so were the patient logs. Even the property ledger had been torn from the administrator's office and replaced with a single phrase, scratched into the desktop with something sharp. The body will forget, but the walls remember. No explanation was ever given. The state declared the site uninhabitable and placed it under silent investigation. No charges were filed. No effort was made to track the missing persons. In time, it simply became easier to pretend it had never existed at all. The maps from 1915 removed the sanatorium entirely. Newspaper archives omitted its name. Even Briar Hollow's census records skipped a year, listing 1912 with a footnote that reads simply, "Records unavailable due to administrative error." But memory is a stubborn thing. And in the decades that followed, things began to leak. A child found an old patient tag buried under fallen leaves, the number 16 etched into brass. A hunter, lost in the woods in 1949, swore he saw a woman in a hospital gown walking barefoot through the snow. When he called out to her, she turned, but had no eyes, just smooth, pale skin where they should have been. She opened her mouth, but made no sound. He never hunted again. Local legends began to bloom, told in bars and passed between generations in hushed voices, that the sanatorium was built on an energy line used by ancient people to separate soul from flesh. That Dorn was never a man, but a vessel for something older and hungrier. That the basement was not a basement at all, but a mouth. And that the women never left because they didn't die. They became part of the building, and the building still breathes. Some nights, hikers say, if you're close enough to the tree line, you'll hear it, a low mechanical hum like a heart monitor turned inward, a groan of stone and sorrow, a single feminine voice whispering again and again, "We are still here," but few dare to listen, and fewer still return. They always said the chapel was the safest place in the hospital, that within those stone walls, lit by thin candles and echoing with hymns, the women of Briar Hollow could find a moment of peace. A quiet hour to pray, to weep, to try and forget the needles, the restraints, the shadows pacing outside their doors. But what they didn't know was that the chapel was built to cover something up. It wasn't until spring of 1920, nearly 8 years after the hospital was shuttered, that anyone dared to step foot inside again. Officially, Briar Hollow was condemned, the doors chained shut, the windows broken by storms and time. But curiosity is a powerful thing, especially when mixed with guilt. A man named Jacob Weller, a former maintenance foreman who had worked in the hospital from 1908 to 1910, came forward with a secret. He was sick terminal cancer and wanted to clear his conscience before death. He told a priest that under the chapel floor there was another floor, one not on any blueprint, one built before the hospital even opened. A subterranean vault, Weller claimed, accessible only through a trapdoor beneath the altar. He described strange deliveries at night, coffins that didn't come from the morgue, medical equipment with no assigned use, and a door that the nurses weren't allowed near. He was told never to ask questions, but he saw it, and what he saw was not meant for healing. A small team of city inspectors and clergy were sent in under armed escort. The building, though decayed, was still standing, its bones cracked and weeping rainwater. The walls were covered in vines. The entrance had to be forced open. The air inside was wrong, not stale, not moldy, still, as if it hadn't moved since the last patient screamed. They moved through the ward slowly, every room frozen in time, dried sheets still tucked into rusted bed frames, a child's doll face down on the floor, wheelchairs tilted on their sides, every clock stuck at 3:17. When they reached the chapel, they found what Weller described, the altar, carved from dark stone, far older than anything else in the hospital, was cracked in the center. Beneath it, buried under layers of dust and cloth, was a small iron ring, A trapdoor. They pried it open. The stench hit them first. Rot, damp, copper. The ladder descended at least 30 feet into complete darkness. Only 3 of them went down. What they found was unspeakable. The space was small, maybe 30 feet across, but the walls weren't stone. They were made of metal, with strange sigils carved into the corners. The kind of symbols you'd find in books no sane person reads, and in the center of the room was a chair, but not a hospital chair, not a dentist's chair. This was something else entirely. It was bolted to the ground. Leather straps on every limb, a head clamp, and directly above it a rusted mechanical device suspended from the ceiling. Something between a surgical instrument and a music box, wires trailing into the walls. Beside it, shelves of notebooks, hundreds of them, and bones, small bones, human, some not fully formed. They weren't just treating patients down here, they were experimenting. The notebooks were written by someone calling themselves Director A.D., likely a reference to Dr. Albrecht Dorn. The entries became more unhinged with each page. The voice beneath the stone is clearer now. It wants order. She sang to me again tonight. The girl with the fractured mind, the way she screams, it shapes the air. There's geometry in her suffering. I removed the tongues of the 3. One sang, one lied, one saw too much. The silence is perfect now. But the most disturbing entry was dated just days before the hospital was shut down. The others are beginning to resist. They claim to hear the children crying through the pipes. Fools, that's not weeping, that's laughter. Tonight, I offer the 13th. Then the gate will open. Gate. To what? They sealed the chamber the next day. The church declared the site profane and demanded it be bricked over immediately. The notebooks were taken, some say, by the Vatican, others by private collectors. The chair was destroyed, at least that's what they claimed, but strange things began to happen again shortly after. People camping in the nearby woods reported waking up to scratching sounds beneath the earth. The ground near the chapel grew soft, like something was breathing beneath it, and on at least one occasion a hiker reported hearing music, a haunting, warbled melody, like a broken music box. When he followed the sound, he found the ruins of the chapel's roof caved in, altar cracked open. But the trapdoor was gone, as if it was never there. Whatever was beneath the stone floor of Briar Hollow, it was never meant to be unearthed, but now it had tasted attention. Now it had tasted worship. And when the final chapter is written, we may not be the ones holding the pen. Time doesn't move the same way in Briar Hollow. Days stretch thin like old wallpaper, and nights fall too fast, like a shutter snapping closed. But what's worse than the dark is the sound. Even after the hospital was abandoned, even after the chapel was sealed, there were still voices, whispers that slithered through the brickwork, echoing down the halls. And those who dared enter the ruin after 1920 said they weren't alone. In 1938, a group of college students from the nearby town of Millhaven snuck into the hospital on a dare. It was meant to be a night of ghost stories and cheap whiskey. One of them, a boy named Elliot Marsh, brought a reel recorder. He wanted to capture the dead. He said what he captured instead was silence at first, then footsteps, not theirs. The recording starts with laughter. Nervous, sharp, the clink of bottles. Someone jokes about finding the chair from the stories, but about 23 minutes in, the tone shifts. Wait, did you hear that? Hear what? I thought, never mind. A hum begins. Low, mechanical, then a voice, distant but unmistakably human. Help, please. They begin to panic, running footsteps, heavy breathing, then knocking, rhythmic, hollow, like fists pounding inside the walls. It's coming from the floor. Jesus Christ, it's coming from the floor. Static, screaming, and finally, a laugh, not theirs, something else. The students were found the next day by a groundskeeper. All except Elliot. His tape recorder was smashed, but the tape itself survived. Police dismissed it as a prank. Elliot's disappearance was blamed on drugs, teenage recklessness, but locals knew better. That same week, A priest from Millhaven published a private letter to his diocese. It read, "I fear the house of suffering has become something far worse, not a place of madness, but of invitation. The walls do not contain the evil, they echo it." Over the next few decades, reports continued. Always the same, sounds behind the walls, women sobbing, children laughing, nails scraping. One vagrant who took shelter in the hospital during a blizzard in 1952 was found days later, wandering the woods barefoot. His tongue was gone, not ripped, not cut. Missing, he had carved one word into the bark of a tree, "Listen." By 1966, the state was ready to demolish Briar Hollow for good. The structure had become unstable. Roofs collapsed, trees grew through windows, but the crew assigned to clear it out refused to go inside. They said the floorboards breathed, that if you stood still long enough, the walls spoke your name. So they brought in a specialist, Dr. William Renner, an acoustics expert from Boston, a skeptic. He believed the entire haunting could be chalked up to old building materials, warped pipes, structural tension, wind patterns. He set up sensors throughout the hospital, recorded for 72 hours straight. What he found made him quit his field entirely. He never spoke publicly about the tapes. But a student assistant who helped with the project shared one entry before Vanishing. "The frequency is beyond human, subsonic, yes, but structured. It responds when spoken to. When I asked its name, the hallway grew warm, and then it laughed, not out loud, inside me." The building was never torn down. Too many accidents, too many refusals. It stands to this day, crumbling, rotten, and alive, because something was invited into those walls, fed by fear, worshipped through agony. And now it echoes, not just in the hospital, but in the minds of anyone who dares to listen too closely. So if you ever find yourself near the old Briar Hollow grounds, and you hear something behind the plaster, a child's voice, a low hum, a whisper just out of reach, don't answer. Don't look for the source, because it's not trying to get out. It's trying to pull you in. There was one place inside Briar Hollow that even the doctors avoided. And not the basement, not the locked archives. This place was above ground, tucked behind a rusted iron door at the far end of the east wing. The silent ward, its name never appeared on blueprints. No entry in staff rosters. No patients officially recorded, and yet everyone who worked there knew it existed and knew to stay away. Former nurse Margaret Hale, who worked at Briar Hollow for 5 years in the 1910s, once described it in a letter to her sister. The letter was never sent. It was found in her attic after her death in 1964. In faded handwriting, she wrote, "There is a hallway that doesn't breathe. You walk past it and feel nothing, like the air itself forgets to move. They keep the quiet ones in there, the ones who don't scream, the ones who just stare. I've seen them carried in, but never out." The hallway leading to the silent ward was narrow and crooked, like it had been added as an afterthought. Only lit by a single hanging bulb that flickered constantly, buzzing like an insect trapped in glass. Staff told stories, half jokes, half warnings, about how the ward was for patients the hospital gave up on. But whispers hinted at something worse. Experiments, not just surgery, not just therapy, but silence itself. A kind of treatment that erased the self. Dr. Lionel Beck, one of the few physicians rumored to have access to the silent ward, was an accomplished neurologist with connections to the Boston Medical Academy. He was also obsessed with one question: can consciousness be reset? He believed that trauma, enough of it, applied in controlled ways, could scrub a person clean, not cure them, not treat them, but erase them, make the mind blank, pure, ready for reprogramming. He called it neurocognitive nullification. He tested it on animals first, then volunteers, then the unwanted. In 1917, A reporter named Harold Stokes posed as an orderly to investigate disappearances at Briar Hollow. He snuck into the East Wing one night with a notepad, a pocket watch, and a revolver. What he found in the silent ward, he only partly managed to write down. His notes, recovered by his publisher after he vanished, read, 7 beds, all full, none of them speak, none blink. Eyes wide open, pupils dilated. They follow you, but they do not see you. One girl in restraints, no visible injuries, but she moves her lips in a rhythm, over and over, can't hear the words. Lip reads like, "Don't let them in." Then a final line, hastily scrawled in smeared ink. "They're not patients, they're vessels." Harold was never seen again. In the late 1920s, the hospital changed hands, new administration, new funding, and a locked order was issued to seal the silent ward permanently, welded shut, records purged. But a contractor who helped board the hallway gave an interview decades later. He recalled, "They made us work at night, hauled in planks like we were sealing a crypt. One of the old orderlies was there, shaking like a leaf, said something kept knocking from the other side the whole time we nailed it shut. He quit the next morning, said if that place ever got opened again, God help us all. And yet, rumors persist that someone has been back. In 1989, a group of paranormal investigators claimed to have broken into the sealed wing. Their footage, grainy and distorted, was uploaded to a forgotten server in the early 2000s and pulled offline within days. Only fragments remain. In one clip, a voice whispers behind the cameraman, though no one else is present. Empty now. Another clip shows a doorway that appears, only on camera, but not to the naked eye. They called it the door that breathes. None of the group spoke publicly again. One, a woman named Alicia Sloan, reportedly checked into a psychiatric facility 3 months later. Her final journal entry before being institutionalized: "The silence followed me home." So what was the silent ward? A hidden wing for dangerous patients, a testing ground for twisted science, or a containment chamber for something that doesn't belong in this world? We don't know, but when the wind is just right, and you stand near the old ruins of Briar Hollow, some say you can hear the sound of beds creaking, leather straps tightening, and soft breathing. Just beyond the walls, if you ever hear it, whatever you do not respond, because silence is not empty, not in Briar Hollow, it's waiting. They called it a mass discharge. That's what the official records say. On March 14, 1933, 67 patients were released from Briar Hollow Hospital in a single day. No prior notices, no family contacts, no medical evaluations, just gone. The discharge logs list the same word next to every name: cleared. But cleared of what? No patient records exist after that date. No forwarding addresses, no follow-up treatments, and not one of the discharged was ever seen again. To understand what happened, we have to go back just 2 weeks earlier, when a series of strange events began unfolding inside Briar Hollow's walls. Nurses reported missing medication. Guards claimed their keys had been tampered with. One orderly, Evan Clint, filed a written complaint stating, "I don't know who's in charge of Wing C anymore. Patients are walking the halls at night. No staff assigned. It's like someone rewrote the schedule behind our backs." Then, on March 9th, a senior doctor named Lucian Ward went missing. His office was locked from the inside, no signs of forced entry. When they broke down the door, they found his desk overturned, all documents burned in the fireplace and scrawled across the soot. Streaked wall in chalk. "We cannot contain them anymore." Who or what did he mean? 2 days later, an unmarked truck arrived at the back loading dock of the hospital. No paperwork, no identification. Witnesses described 4 men in black coats wearing cloth masks. They carried wooden crates, large, heavy, and wheeled them into the records room, which was locked and sealed for over 48 hours. When the doors were reopened, every file cabinet inside had been emptied. Every single patient record before 1933 gone, and then came March 14th. According to a surviving memo from the director's office at exactly 5:07 a.m., a hospital-wide alarm was triggered, not the fire alarm. Something else. The sound was described as a low mechanical hum, followed by a high-pitched tone that lasted nearly 2 minutes. Lights flickered, doors unlocked, and every patient's cell in wings A through F opened at once. Some described it as a purge, others called it a release. One surviving nurse, Marlene Vicks, gave a statement in 1952, long after the hospital closed. She was 89 years old at the time. This is what she remembered. We found them standing at the front gate. All of them, 60. 7 patients in white gowns, staring at nothing. No panic, no confusion, just waiting. When we tried to speak, they said nothing. They didn't blink. One of them, Mr. Taylor, I think, had gauze still wrapped around his eyes. He just smiled when the gate opened. And then they walked out, single file, into the woods. Police were notified. Search teams deployed. Dogs tracked their scent as far as the old river bend. Then nothing. It was as if the patients dissolved into the trees. No bodies, no signs of struggle. Just white hospital slippers left by the water. After the mass disappearance, the hospital issued a single press release. It read, "Due to unforeseen administrative restructuring, certain long-term patients have been transferred off-site to undisclosed care facilities. This action was taken in compliance with state medical codes." No further explanation was ever given, but investigators would later discover something deeply unsettling. In 1978, paranormal researcher Daniel Carr discovered that all 67 names from the 1933 discharge matched death certificates filed decades earlier, in the 1890s. Same names, same birth years, same illnesses, which begs the question, were these patients ever alive to begin with, or were they something else, hiding behind stolen names and decayed files? Some believe the mass discharge was never an escape. It was an evacuation, a coordinated release of something dangerous, not people, but vessels, entities that had outgrown their cages. Dr. Lucian Ward's final, chilling message seems to confirm this. We built this place to hold them. We failed. To this day, no trace of the 67 has been found. But reports still come in. A man in Toledo found sitting motionless on a park bench, whispering the word Briar. A woman in Montana, wearing a tattered white gown, who walked into a diner and vanished before police arrived. And a child in Oregon, claiming her invisible friend, used to live in a big brick hospital with no windows. Are the discharged still out there? If they are no longer patients. They are something else entirely. And they are still wandering.